Hey everybody, welcome back. In today's video, we're looking at Fantom. Now, full disclosure, I own some Fantom, but I am not very impressed with how it's performed. And there are a few things that really worry me about Fantom, really worry me. But having said that, there's also some bullish signs and there's also some nice indicators that have played out in a similar way which could indicate good price performance. The most obvious to me is this double top that we put in during the bear year and the pre-halving year. If we go back to 2019, which was, or 2018 even, we had this peak in the bear run year, and then the year afterwards, the pre-halving, we had a similar peak where we came back to a similar level. And then what we saw immediately after that, you can see we have our first top and our second top. We had a slow sell-off during that time frame. And we can see that once we had our initial pullback, we spent most of the time below our bull market support band. If we take a look at what we're currently going through, we can see we've had this initial move up, which could be correlated to this guy. We'll get into that again as the video goes on, but it is our second move up to this double top that we saw play out again in the bear year and then the pre-halving year. And now we're having a retracement, and we can even see that we have come down to the bull market support band, and we've tested the 21-week and the 20-week. Now for the moment, we have rebounded off and we seem to be just above, which could be considered bullish, but we saw this happen here as well. If we zoom right back, we saw that we wicked below, but ultimately closed the week on the 20-week, and then as it updated and the 20 and the 21-week grew with the previous data being included, it pushed above the entry price of that week, and then we just dropped below, and it was taken as a bearish sign. We are quite a while away from the end of the week, naturally. It is Wednesday as of recording, so anything can happen during this time. We might move up, we might fluctuate the same range, we might move down, anything's possible. Again, things in crypto never have to play out the same. Another couple of things I want to look at is these date ranges up to the halving. And we can see this blue one here indicates where we started our initial move up, sort of where we had this move that put in our double top. And if we move back, we can see that if we go back to this range from the halving, of course, this is from the halving, 27 weeks, we can see that they don't really line up. However, what is interesting is you could argue this 27 weeks is where Fantom just continuously puts in lower highs. Up to this point, we were going higher highs here, higher lows, give or take every week. From this point on, Fantom does not put in another higher high until after the halving. And we can see this point actually holds a significant resistance over at this point, and then there's a support here. So it plays quite an important role, the close of this week, which is where we currently, or not currently are, where we opened here. So maybe potentially down the line, if Fantom does perform poorly, if we do see a pullback like this after our second double top, sorry, not our second double top, if we do see a pullback after this, after our peak on our double top, where we do move below this 27-week close, it could act as a resistance and a support in the future like it did previously. Again, no guarantee. If we take a look at this red line, this indicates where our initial huge sell-off began. Now this was what was called COVID sell-off, where a lot of stuff crashed and we saw a big percentage drop. Most people are familiar with this. Again, early 2020 is when it took place. We can see this is 13 weeks out. And if we zoom into the current day, our initial sell-off from our double top has been 17 weeks out. So again, quite a bit of a variation in how things have played out and the time frames they've occurred. However, if you would like to take a different approach and we zoom in on our 13-week from the halving, if we bring it back to where, say, we bottomed, we can see we had 5 weeks basically leading up to the halving of poor price action and where we had big sell-offs. And I've spoken about this before on my channel with Bitcoin and Ethereum videos and other altcoins. Every halving, Bitcoin and most of the altcoin space do have a big sell-off. And it is similar to this magnitude that we saw with COVID. And now for me personally, I think that whether COVID came or not, I think we would have seen a similar price movement to the downward, whether that was all in one hit like we got with COVID over like a space of 5 weeks, or whether that was broken down into multiple drops over a longer period of time. And again, sort of during this time frame, a lot of stuff played out much quicker during this halving cycle. And this current halving cycle has played out much slower. And that's, I think, down to the amount of money that entered the economy and now the amount of money being sucked out of the economy. But that's me rambling. We're looking at this 5 weeks of from start to finish of where we had poor price action. If we go to where we currently are and bring that down to 5 weeks, we can see that we do potentially have another week or two of poor price action. So we have about another week of poor price action potentially, and this could be what brings us below this bull market support band. Now, if per se we are only due for one more week of poor price action, which is not a confirmation at all, it's just a previous performance that we're looking at. If we have one more week of poor price action, we could see Fantom temporarily dip below and maybe slowly trend down, but not in a meaningful way, or we could just have a strong reversion and Fantom rallies up into the halving. And we can see that leading up to the halving and after the halving, Fantom just goes crazy. And that was quite unlike a lot of altcoins. A lot of altcoins had a slowdown during this period. We can see Fantom also did have a slowdown, but a lot of altcoins had serious corrections here. Whereas Fantom, while it was a big correction, if we go from its peak at the time to where it fell to, it was down 73%. But a lot of altcoins fell a lot further, and they fell a lot further from a much smaller rally up. So Fantom really outperformed last cycle. And if we take a look at, if you were to buy at the halving and sell close to the top, you made almost a 100,000% move, so you 1000x your money, which is crazy. So Fantom was definitely a top performer. However, what worries me now, what does worry me quite significantly, is the volume that we're seeing on the Fantom network. And this to me is a sign of life. It's the pulse of a cryptocurrency, in my opinion. If there's lots of people using the currency, the trading volume is going to be high. And you can get into the weeds of it, like how many individual transactions, because some people might send huge lumps of Fantom in one transaction to inflate these figures, when really it's only like 10 people using the network and they're all sending, 1 million Fantom each. Beside the point, but for me, just for a rough and ready look, the volume here is really scary. And if we zoom in, we can see that during these 5 weeks of COVID, Fantom traded 7.3 billion tokens. And over the space of 27 weeks, sort of leading up to COVID and leading up to after it, it traded just under 20 billion tokens, which is a huge amount, don't get me wrong. If we zoom into what we're currently looking at, we can see that over a similar 5 week period, Fantom has only traded 100 million tokens. And now 100 million is a big number, but in terms of what we had when Fantom was a much younger, unheard of project, it's doing far less. And again, if we zoom in and take a look at what we have had so far with this 27 week period. Now, a lot of it hasn't played out yet. We're only about halfway through, but we can see we're nowhere close to the 19 billion that Fantom put in during the last 27 weeks, half a year time frame that it did here. So even if it continues on this course, Fantom will maybe be $1.5 billion compared to the 19 billion it was before. It just worries me to see a huge drastic drop off of transactions during basically the exact same time. I know a lot of people can say, well, during this time, Fantom was extremely oversold because of COVID scares and everyone was rushing to sell their tokens. You can argue that, and I do think that does play a part. But however, there has been lots of fear and uncertainty in this market. And if you want to really test that theory, we can just check quickly, make a very quick check how much Fantom made, say, June of the year before. And we can see over 10 weeks, 13 billion. And that was in sort of a bit of a renaissance, a bit of a revival time in crypto. 2019, June, mid-June. If we go to 2023 June and take a look at what Fantom was putting in over a similar time frame, we can see we're just under $1 billion. We're just under $1 billion, whereas before we're 13 billion. And there's no such thing as COVID during these times, and this is bullish time for FTM. So again, it shows that there's fear, or at least I am worried about Fantom not actually really being used. And again, it's a cool coin, I think, and it definitely did an amazing last run, but did it potentially do too well last run, and now it has to correct itself and not perform as well this run because it was so overbought and so overinflated that it turned into not a pump and dump, but just a never-ending pump that once it reached its top, it realized it was way, way, way too overbought. And I'm not saying a lot of altcoins don't experience this and continue to do well the next cycle. Again, crypto is basically, the gains come from speculation. That's what makes the money, people speculating and hype. However, I do think we will not see as an impressive move as we did here, from the halving to the all-time high of a 1000x move. What also does scare me is it had this amazing move, and for a while it was like top 20. I don't even know if it broke top 20 for very long, but it was up there for a little bit, and now it's just faded. And I'm I'm pretty sure it's in the top 50 at the moment, but it's not super reassuring. You never know. There could be a big move. I don't know. Again, nobody knows what's going to happen with these coins, so it's up to you to decide on what you think will happen. Again, just to reiterate, once Fantom sort of gets through the halving, it does usually do well like a lot of cryptos, but we only have one use case to compare to. And it could be one of those sleeper coins that flies under the radar of everybody again and just suddenly takes off, like we saw Solana do and we saw Avalanche do. Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to wait and see. Again, just very quickly as well, before we move to the BTC pair, during Bullrun years as well, Avalanche does seem to put in a support that it usually rallies from. And we've only really had one Bullrun year for Fantom, but it could be something to look out for in 2025 when potentially we have our big moves up. And once Fantom starts to retrace, maybe our first local low is where we'll see Fantom return to over the course of its cycle. Again, I'll remind you, this sell-off was, huge. It went down 80% basically, and this was during the bull run year. So it just goes to show that even when crypto is in a bull run, you can still lose 80% of your money, depending totally on when you buy, of course, but it is scary. Just something to be aware of. And again, a similar move, sort of 94% down, and that's not even to the all-time low. Just again, not trying to burst any bubbles, but it's not always sunshine and rainbows. Moving to the Bitcoin pair, a bit of a different looking chart than usual. You can see I have this, first of all, the one that always sticks out to me is this purple line, and to me that is the true value of Fantom against Bitcoin, and I think it's fair for it to slowly trend up very slowly. Like we can see that it doesn't really do too much. It goes up basically 400 satoshis in the space of 6 years, give or take, which I think is fair. And if I was going to accurately price Fantom against Bitcoin, I think this is where I will put it. And for me, it does a good job of marking a middle ground, or a place where Fantom will most likely trend back to. And I got this line not just from local tops and bottoms and highs and resistances. I also pulled it from looking at the median, or the average total price per week divided by weeks sort of thing. That helped me chart out a similar graph as well. We also have these white lines dictate or showing off the pre-halving bear run moves, and this blue to represent the bull run. Again, this is on the Bitcoin pair, and we can see Fantom did move drastically during its bull run year. But another thing that is interesting is that, like all altcoins that we've seen, sort of immediately after the halving, a lot of altcoins rally against Bitcoin, but then they all of them, literally all of them, have this extremely strong pullback against Bitcoin, where Bitcoin gets a lot of its value back. It's not necessarily going to play out in a similar way. Like, again, this time was hectic for all markets, so anything can happen in a sort of more relaxed, less hyper market. But I probably do think something will happen to this extent. Maybe Bitcoin won't get as strong a pullback. Maybe the altcoins won't get as strong of a pump. Something to be aware of, though. It does happen in basically every single altcoin. But to take a look at where it went from the halving up to its all-time high on Bitcoin, again, crazy numbers, looking at 175x move. Huge money compared to holding Bitcoin. Another thing to note is that while Fantom is in these downward trends, if we look at the 2019 sort of movement, the pre-halving year for Fantom, we can see we often wick up to the top here and hug the top of the resistance line until we eventually drop down below and put in our support, where, we can see here we only test the support once or twice, maybe 3 times really, up until the halving. But one thing to note is that we do test it close to the halving. If we zoom back to current day, we can see we spend some time testing the top, but ultimately we spend most of this time slap bang in the middle. And while we have fluctuated up and down, up and above the bull market support band, we are probably spending an even amount of time on each. And I should actually update this white line to probably something like this, because we can see that we have bounced off this true value of Fantom. And again, this isn't a magic line that I've pulled from nowhere. It's something that actually holds a significance to Fantom on its Bitcoin pair, and it's proved that time and time again. And it is interesting that it has bounced off here very recently. Maybe we'll come back and break below. Again, we do see negative price movements up until the halving, and then we at least have seen before a extreme reversal where we have huge price movements on altcoins compared to Bitcoin. I do think it's the time where Bitcoin will begin to start losing value against the altcoin space, and dominance will go down. There's still time for dominance to go up in the meantime, though. And if dominance is going up, it means altcoins are losing value against Bitcoin, which means you should be holding Bitcoin, not an altcoin. But if you're moving into an altcoin now, I couldn't knock you for that at all. I think it's coming to crunch time in a way. And I think the losses that you might make by moving from Bitcoin to whatever Fantom now, I think you'll probably make back pretty quickly sometime after the halving. Another quick interesting thing to point out with Fantom is that here we can see I've marked where our decline began, where we tested the local top and saw a retracement, and this was 17 weeks before the halving. And if we zoom into our first halving that Fantom experienced, it was 18 weeks when Fantom started to experience its sell-off on its Bitcoin pair. Now you could argue that it's like, 20 weeks or 21. I don't think it's too major of a point to make. Basically, it's more or less an extremely similar time frame. So just something to be aware of. And when we put in this top, we then tested the low very quickly afterwards. And again, this was COVID times, so you might say it's not as extreme. We also have much less of a way to go in terms of where we put our support in on the Bitcoin pair. So I think it is very possible that Fantom could come back down and test this support, or maybe even bounce off my opinion of the true value of Fantom on its Bitcoin pair. Last thing to look at is the time that we've spent above true value and time that we've spent below true value. We can see we have spent a majority of time above true value, in my opinion. And if we don't see a dip below in the coming months, it is maybe something I will have to reevaluate in terms of where I think true value should be. That doesn't mean a coin can't stay well above its true value for a long period of time. It would just be something I would have to take another look at, and maybe I could make a video out of it. I don't know. I do feel like we will probably spend a little bit of time. Again, usually leading up to the halving, we do see negative price action, and that is not just based on the previous halving, it's based on multiple previous halvings. We'll have to see what happens. We could still get this trade down without necessarily dipping below the true value. It's one of those things where we just have to wait and see. And again, there's no guarantee that we do see a big spike and pullback like we did with Fantom and basically all the other altcoins last halving, although it has done similar things with halvings before on other altcoins. Past performance is no guarantee of future returns. So just something to keep in mind. I think that about wraps up this video, guys. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. Again, we're very close to 1,000 subscribers. And all of you subscribing and commenting and liking really does help out the channel, and I appreciate it hugely. If you think someone might be interested in these videos or my channel, please also share it with them. You never know, you might help them, and if they don't like it, fair enough. Anyway, thanks again, guys. Take care and peace.